You think you know weakness. You think it's the trembling hand, the bowed head, the quiet voice that says, "Yes, sir." But you are mistaken. True weakness is the arrogance of a man in a $5,000 suit who has forgotten how to look, who sees only what he expects to see. True strength is not the roar, it is the whisper that carries the truth. It is the power of noticing. It is the ability to perceive the single, fraudulent fiber in a sheet of paper that a dozen of the most ruthless attorneys in Chicago missed while they were too busy admiring the sound of their own billable hours. Elara Vance was a ghost who served cocktails at the Sovereign, a steakhouse where deals were not made but consecrated. She refilled water glasses. She crumbed tables. She was, by design and necessity, utterly invisible. But last Thursday, her invisibility, and a lifetime spent with paper and ink, would detonate a conspiracy and save an industrial empire from being stolen. And what the aging titan of that empire did next would prove to everyone in that gilded room that the most powerful person is often the one you never saw coming. The Sovereign wasn't merely a restaurant, it was a sanctuary of power, carved from dark walnut and old money. The air, thick with the scent of dry-aged porterhouse, expensive cologne, and whispered secrets, was a currency in itself. To work there, you needed more than the ability to recite the wine list. You needed the discipline of a ghost, the ability to materialize with a fresh napkin and vanish before your presence registered. Elara, at 27, was a master of vanishing. To the titans of industry and their legal entourages, she was a pair of hands, a polite murmur of, "Excuse me," or more often, nothing at all. They didn't know she was the last in a line of cartographers and antiquarian document restorers. They didn't know that her hands, which now cleared away their half-eaten lobster tails, had once painstakingly mended 17th century maps and identified forged historical letters. They didn't know her father, a brilliant man now trapped in the slow, cruel prison of Parkinson's, had taught her to read a document not by its words, but by its soul, its paper, its ink, its watermark, its very scent. They didn't know that she had traded the scent of aging parchment for the stench of truffle oil to pay for the nurses who now cared for the man who had taught her everything. They saw an apron, not an archivist, and most nights the anonymity was a shield. Being invisible allowed her to observe, and at the Sovereign, observation was a masterclass in human nature. Table 7, Elara, the Sterling party, whispered Marco, the maitre d', his face tight with attention that radiated off him in waves. He looked like a man who had just been told the IRS was auditing his tips. The whole damn boardroom is with him. Elara's breath hitched. Arthur Sterling, the founder and CEO of Sterling Innovations, a manufacturing giant that had built half the infrastructure in the Midwest. Sterling was a Chicago legend, a man who had started with a single machine shop and forged an empire through grit and genius. But the financial news for the past month had been a feeding frenzy. A vicious, hostile takeover was being orchestrated by Julian Croft, a young, ruthless private equity shark who seemed to have a personal vendetta against the old man. "Is it the meeting?" Elara asked, her voice low as she adjusted the knot of her apron. "This is it," Marco confirmed, running a hand over his slicked-back hair. "The final stand. Croft is forcing a vote on the acquisition tomorrow morning. Sterling's bringing his entire legal team from Thorne and Albright, a dozen of them. They've taken the Augustus room. They need the big table, the projector, everything." Marco leaned in closer. "They look like they're attending a funeral, Elara." "His funeral." Elara nodded, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "I'll take care of them." She moved through the main dining room, a heavy silver tray laden with ice water and heavy crystal glasses balanced perfectly on her palm. She was a silent ship, navigating a sea of boisterous conversations and clinking silverware. When she pushed open the massive, soundproofed walnut doors of the Augustus room, the silence inside was more deafening than the noise outside. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with despair and the metallic tang of fear. Arthur Sterling sat at the head of the immense table, looking every one of his 72 years. The formidable presence she'd seen in newspaper photos was gone, replaced by a weary slump in his broad shoulders. His silver hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was in disarray, and his eyes, a startlingly sharp blue, were clouded with exhaustion. He looked like a king watching his castle being dismantled stone by stone. Surrounding him were the lawyers, a dozen of them, men and women in dark, impeccably tailored suits, the legal phalanx of Thorne and Albright, Chicago's most feared and most expensive corporate law firm. They were a tableau of defeat, junior associates staring grimly at their laptops, senior partners with faces of practiced sympathy that failed to hide their impatience. Pacing before a large projection screen was Marcus Thorne, the firm's lead litigator. Elara knew his type. He radiated an aura of expensive schooling and casual cruelty. A man who believed his six-figure retainer fee made him the smartest person in any room. He was jabbing at the screen with a laser pointer, his voice a smooth, condescending baritone. "And that, Arthur, is the final nail," Thorne was saying, the laser dot quivering on a highlighted clause. "There is no ambiguity. The original partnership charter, Article 17, Section B, it's an ironclad dissolution clause. If a majority partner declares the company's direction fundamentally untenable, they can force a buyout vote from a pre-vetted external party. Croft's father was your original partner. Croft inherited that stake. He's declared your recent R&D investments untenable, and he's the only external party on the pre-vetted list from 1978. We've examined it from every conceivable angle, a dozen of our best minds, Arthur. If there were a way out, we would have found it." Elara began her silent ritual, placing a heavy water glass beside each lawyer. Not a single one acknowledged her. She was part of the decor. "I built this company with my bare hands." Arthur Sterling's voice was a low rumble, laced with a pain that was almost physical. "I didn't build it to hand over to that vulture's whelp. Julian Croft is not a builder. He's a butcher. There has to be something. A misfiling. A precedent." Thorne let out a sigh, a theatrical display of exhausted patience. "Arthur, we've been through this. We have had paralegals combing through 40 years of corporate filings for the last 96 hours. We've cross-referenced state and federal statutes. The language is archaic, but it's legally sound. Croft has you. The vote is a formality. Your board is spooked by his press campaign. They'll fold. Sign the settlement offer. Take the 9-figure payout and retire. Go fishing." Elara moved to pour water for Thorne. He didn't bother to move his arm, forcing her to reach around him in an awkward, servile posture. He was still staring at Sterling, a look of smug pity on his face. "So I just—" "Surrender?" Sterling whispered, the words sounding like shards of glass in his throat. "It's not surrender, Arthur. It's a strategic exit," Thorne said, glancing at the Patek Philippe on his wrist, a watch that cost more than Elara's father's last 3 years of medical care. "We've done the work. There's nothing more to be done." But they were wrong. Elara didn't know it yet, but they were profoundly, catastrophically wrong. The dinner service was a somber affair, a parade of untouched filet mignons and half-empty glasses of obscenely expensive Bordeaux. The mood in the room curdled as the hours ticked by. The long table became a war zone of discarded legal pads, steak knives, and shattered morale. Ilara moved in and out, a silent witness to the slow-motion dismantling of a man's life's work. And with every entry, she listened. Her father hadn't just taught her about paper. He had taught her about context, about seeing what didn't fit. The story Marcus Thorne was telling felt wrong. Not legally, perhaps, but fundamentally. It felt like a perfectly constructed sentence with one word misspelled. The crux of their problem was the founding charter from 1978. Thorne kept the digital scan of the critical page, page 24, projected on the screen. It was a grainy, black and white image of a typewritten document. "This right here," Thorne said, his voice rising as if repetition would make it more palatable. "Article 17, Section B. It's a poison pill, Arthur, and Croft's father convinced you to swallow it 40 years ago." A young, nervous-looking associate named Peterson dared to speak up. "Mr. Thorne, what about the amendment records from 1985? We noted the charter was revised when the company went public. Is there any chance this clause was superseded?" Thorne waved a dismissive hand. "We pulled the revision logs, standard boilerplate stuff, share dilutions, board structuring. Article 17 was untouched. It's foundational. Believe me, if there was a crack, we'd have found it." Arthur Sterling had his head in his hands, the fight visibly draining from him. He looked like a man hollowed out from the inside. Ilara was clearing a breadbasket when her eyes fell on a stack of documents near Sterling's end of the table. Unlike the pristine laser-printed briefs the other lawyers had, this was a pile of original file copies, the actual physical documents pulled from the company's archives. They were yellowed with brittle edges and the faint, dusty scent of old paper that she knew so well. The lawyers were all staring at their glowing screens, at the digital ghost of the document. No one was looking at the real thing. She paused, a stack of plates in her hand, her gaze fixed on the physical copy of the 1978 charter. It was open to the page in question, page 24. But as her eyes scanned the text, a strange dissonance prickled at the back of her mind. Something was off. She blinked, leaning slightly as if to get a better angle. The typeface on the physical document was a standard Courier, the letters slightly uneven, some fainter than others, with the subtle ink bleed characteristic of a physical ribbon striking paper. "More coffee, Mr. Thorne?" Ilara asked, her voice a soft autopilot. "Whatever," he grunted, not looking at her. He slid a thick leather-bound folder in front of Sterling. "Arthur, the settlement papers. Croft's offer expires at midnight. That's in..." He checked his watch again. 32 minutes. We need your signature." As she poured the coffee, her eyes darted back to that single page. The digital image on the screen was a clean, high-contrast reproduction. But the physical page, the paper itself, felt wrong. From 3 feet away, she could see it. The other pages in the document had the warm, slightly fibrous, creamy yellow patina of aged high-rag content paper from that era. But page 24 was different. It was a paler, flatter shade of yellow, with a subtle, almost imperceptible smoothness that was characteristic of modern, acid-free archival paper that had been artificially aged with chemicals. Her heart began a low, heavy thrum against her ribs. And then she saw it. A detail so small, so insignificant, that no one else would ever notice. At the very bottom of the page, almost invisible against the footer, was a watermark. The rest of the charter bore the faint, elegant watermark of the Crane and Cumswood paper mill, the standard for important documents in the 70s. Page 24 had no watermark at all. She almost dropped the coffee pot. It was a forgery, a brilliant one, but a forgery nonetheless. Someone had replaced the original page 24 with a newly created one, carefully typed on artificially aged paper to match the surrounding document. They had copied the text from all the other clauses, but had inserted the ironclad dissolution clause. The lawyers, working from a digital scan, would never see the difference in paper stock or the missing watermark. They were analyzing the words, not the medium. They were trying to solve a crime by reading the confession note without ever checking if the handwriting matched. She bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. She was a waitress, a nobody. Intervening would be professional suicide. Marco would fire her on the spot. These men would have her blacklisted from every restaurant in the city. To accuse them of missing something so fundamental was to tell a team of surgeons they had left a sponge inside the patient. But then she looked at Arthur Sterling. He looked like her father on the day the doctors gave him the diagnosis, a man watching the world he had built with his own 2 hands dissolve into smoke. He was being swindled, not by a legal loophole, but by a common criminal's trick. And she, Ilara Vance, the girl who grew up breathing the dust of history, was the only person in the world who could see it. She couldn't stay silent. She couldn't. She took a slow, steadying breath. The room was deathly quiet as Thorne pushed a gold-plated fountain pen toward Sterling. "The settlement agreement," Thorne said, his voice a silken trap. "Sign it, Arthur. It's time. Let it go." Sterling picked up the pen. His hand, once strong enough to shape steel, trembled. He looked at the signature line, then at the faces of the dozen lawyers he was paying millions to, all of them nodding, their expressions a mixture of pity and impatience. They just wanted this to be over. "I suppose," Sterling began, his voice cracking with the weight of his unshed grief. "I suppose you're right." He lowered the pen to the paper. "Don't sign it." The words, spoken softly, but cutting through the silence like a shard of glass, came from Ilara. The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was a physical void, a black hole that sucked all the air and sound out of the room. Sterling froze, the nib of the pen hovering a millimeter above the page. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, 13 heads turned to stare at her. Marcus Thorne looked at her as if a piece of silverware had just offered a legal opinion. His eyes narrowed, taking in her simple black uniform, her apron, the coffee pot still clutched in her hand. "Excuse me?" Thorne's voice was arctic. Ilara's own hands were shaking violently now, but she gripped the coffee pot as if it were an anchor. "Don't sign it, Mr. Sterling. That page, the one they're all looking at, it's not real." Thorne let out a single, sharp bark of incredulous laughter. He looked around at his team, then back at her. "Is this some kind of pathetic prank? Marco, get your staff under control." "I'm not joking," Ilara said, a surprising strength flowing into her voice. The fear was still there, but it was now joined by the cold, clear certainty of her expertise. "And I mean no disrespect, gentlemen, but you've all been analyzing a digital copy. You've been arguing about the words on a page, but you haven't looked at the page itself." "And what about it?" Thorne snapped, his face beginning to flush a dangerous shade of crimson. "It's a 40-year-old document. What is there to see?" "It's a forgery," she said, the words hanging in the air, clear and irrefutable. She pointed with her free hand, not at the screen, but at the yellowed document by Sterling's elbow. "Page 24, the paper is wrong." Thorne's face contorted with rage. He stood up, his full height meant to intimidate. "Young lady, we are discussing a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. We do not require the half-baked opinions of the catering staff on matters of paper. Now leave this room before I have you thrown out." Arthur Sterling, however, hadn't moved. He hadn't taken his eyes off her. He saw past the uniform. He saw the terror in her eyes. Yes, but beneath it, he saw a bedrock of conviction that he hadn't seen in any of his lawyers. "Wait," Sterling said, his voice quiet but firm. "Arthur, for God's sake," Thorne groaned. "She's a waitress. She's probably angling for a sympathy tip." "I said wait," Sterling commanded, and this time the voice that had built an empire echoed in the room. The old lion was still there. He put the pen down. Slowly, he reached out and drew the physical charter towards him. He slipped on a pair of reading glasses. "Page 24, Ilara whispered. "Feel it, and look for the watermark." Sterling turned to the page. He ran his thumb over the surface, his expression quizzical. Then he held it up to the light from the chandelier. He stared at it for a long, silent moment. He turned back a page to 23 and held that up to the light. A faint, elegant C was visible in the fibers. Then he turned back to 24. Nothing. Just paper. He lowered the document, his face ashen. He looked at the screen, then at the paper in his hands. He looked at Marcus Thorne. "Marcus," Sterling said, his voice dangerously soft. "You told me this clause was foundational. Part of the original agreement." "It is, Arthur. Unequivocally." "Then explain to me," Sterling said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "why it's printed on different paper than the rest of the goddamn contract." The room erupted. "What?" Thorne snatched the document from Sterling's hands. He held it to the light, his face a mask of disbelief. He frantically flipped between pages 23, 24, and 25. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, dough-like pallor. I don't understand. It must be a clerical error. A replacement page from the archives. A replacement page with a clause that hands my entire company to my biggest rival?" Sterling roared, getting to his feet. He wasn't a tired old man anymore. He was a titan, awakened and furious. "A clause that none of you questioned?" "It's not just the paper," Ilara said, stepping forward, the fear now completely gone, replaced by the righteous fire of a specialist in her element. "The typography is wrong, too. Look at the kerning on the capital T's and the baseline of the lowercase g. It's too perfect. That wasn't produced by a 1978 IBM Selectric typewriter. That's a digital font, meticulously designed to replicate it. It's a modern creation, printed on artificially aged paper. It's a fake, a very, very good one. But a fake." Silence. Thorne stared at her, his mouth agape. The other lawyers were frantically whispering, pulling up font analysis websites on their phones. The young associate, Peterson, looked up, his eyes wide. She's right. The G descender loop. It's a known variant in the monotype Courier Classic Pro font, released in 2002. It wouldn't exist on a machine from the 70s. The implication crashed over the room like a tidal wave. This wasn't a loophole. This was felony fraud, conspiracy, forgery on a scale that would lead to prison sentences. Arthur Sterling looked at Marcus Thorne, who was now sweating profusely, the paper trembling in his hand. "You told me it was over," Sterling said, his voice a low, deadly growl. "You and your 11 colleagues, billing me $7,000 an hour, told me to surrender my life's work because of a forged document you couldn't be bothered to actually look at." "Arthur, it was in the digital file, the chain of custody from the archives. We couldn't have known," Thorne stammered. "You couldn't have known," Sterling thundered, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara. "She knew. A waitress serving you coffee did more due diligence in 30 seconds than your entire firm did in a month. She knew." All eyes turned back to Ilara. She felt as if she were standing in the center of a hurricane. Sterling's gaze softened as it fell on her. "What is your name, young lady?" "Elara," she whispered. "Elara Vance." "Elara Vance," Sterling repeated, the name tasting of victory. He turned back to Thorne, his face a mask of cold fury. "Get out." "Arthur, we need to strategize. File an immediate injunction against Croft for fraud," Thorne began, desperately trying to regain control. "I said get out," Sterling bellowed, sweeping a half-dozen crystal glasses off the table with a furious backhand. They shattered on the marble floor. "All of you. You're fired. Every last one of you. Take your expensive briefcases and your worthless advice and get the hell out of my building before I sue your firm into oblivion for malpractice so gross it borders on criminal conspiracy." The scene devolved into chaos. The dozen lawyers scrambled to pack their belongings, a panicked herd of disgraced professionals. Thorne shot Elara one last look, a toxic cocktail of hatred, humiliation, and disbelief, before he turned and fled the room. When the heavy walnut doors clicked shut, the sudden silence was broken only by the sound of Arthur Sterling's heavy breathing. He sank back into his chair at the head of the table, the adrenaline leaving him as quickly as it had come. He looked across the wreckage of the room at the young woman in the simple black uniform who was still standing by the coffee station. He stared at her for a long time. "You're not just a waitress, are you, Elara Vance?" "Tonight, sir," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I am." "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair Marcus Thorne had just vacated. "I can't, sir. I have to clean this up. And my other tables. I'll buy the restaurant," Sterling said, his voice flat and absolute. "Sit down." Elara sat. The leather was still warm. It felt like sitting on a throne that didn't belong to her. "Marco," Sterling's voice boomed toward the door. The maitre d' appeared a second later, his eyes wide with terror at the sight of the shattered glass. "Yes, Mr. Sterling?" "Close the restaurant for the night," Sterling commanded. "Send the staff and the other patrons home. Bill everything to my account. Lock the main doors, but leave the espresso machine on. Miss Vance and I have a great deal of work to do." "But sir," Marco stammered, glancing at Elara's apron. "Elara Vance," Sterling cut him off, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel more seen than she had in years. "Is currently the most valuable asset in my entire company. Now go." For the next 4 hours, under the warm glow of the Augustus Room's chandeliers, the space transformed. It was no longer a dining room, it was a command center. They pushed aside the fine china and spread the archival documents across the vast expanse of the mahogany table. The air filled not with the scent of steak, but with the dry, dusty smell of old paper and the sharp aroma of freshly brewed espresso. "All right, Elara Vance," Sterling said, handing her a delicate porcelain cup of coffee. "Tell me the truth. You didn't learn about monotype fonts and crane and code watermarks, waiting tables." She took a deep breath, the steam warming her face. "My family. We're in the paper business. Or we were. Vance and Son, antiquarian maps and documents. My father and his father before him. They were restorers, authenticators. I grew up learning how to spot a fake Rembrandt sketch by the lignin content in the paper." Sterling's eyes, sharp and intelligent, held a flicker of something new. Recognition. "Vance and Son, on Clark Street, with the old globe in the window?" Elara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "That's the one. I bought a 19th century map of the Chicago River from your father 20 years ago," Sterling said softly. "A wonderful man. Fierce handshake, eyes like a hawk. How is he?" "He has Parkinson's," she said, her voice quiet. "The medical bills. The shop couldn't support them. I had to close it down and find a job with better cash flow. The shame of it stung, even now. Sterling looked at her, and there was no pity in his eyes. There was something harder, something better. Understanding. You sacrificed your legacy to protect your family. There is no shame in that. There is only honor. He refocused, his energy shifting back to the problem at hand. So we know the document is a forgery. Croft and his father before him have been playing a 40-year-long con. This isn't just a takeover attempt. It's a criminal conspiracy. He won't know we've found him out yet, Ilara said, her mind clicking into a familiar gear. It felt like coming home. He'll be expecting your signed settlement agreement by midnight. When he doesn't get it, he'll assume you're just stalling. The vote is still scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow, Sterling said. He'll walk into that boardroom expecting to be crowned king. We can't just stand up and yell forgery. The board is full of nervous old men who trust lawyers in expensive suits, not us. We don't need to convince them with words, Ilara said, a plan beginning to form in her mind. A beautiful, intricate map. We need to show them proof. Irrefutable, physical proof. Mr. Sterling, where is the original charter? The one locked away in the deep archives? In the main vault at headquarters, he said, but it will have the same forged page. Croft must have swapped it years ago. Probably, she agreed. But what about the typewriter it was written on? The one from your first office in 1978? Sterling frowned. The old IBM. God, I haven't thought about that in decades. I think I put it in storage. In the basement of the old factory building on the south side. A slow, fierce smile spread across Ilara's face. Mr. Sterling, I need you to make a phone call. I need access to that typewriter. And I need the best document forensics lab in the country on standby. What are you thinking? He asked, leaning forward, captivated. I'm thinking, she said, her eyes gleaming in the low light, that every typewriter, like every person, has a unique fingerprint. Worn keys, misaligned letters. If we can prove that page 24 was not typed on the same machine as the other 50 pages of that charter, then we don't just win the vote. We send Julian Croft to prison. They had forgotten, however, about Marcus Thorne. A man like Thorne, defined entirely by his reputation for invincibility, does not accept defeat. He seeks retribution. Humiliated and fired, he didn't go home. He went straight to the source of his problem. At 2 a.m. in a penthouse suite overlooking the city, Thorne stood before a furious Julian Croft. "A waitress?" Croft hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're telling me your entire 12-man, $7,000 an hour legal team was outsmarted by a waitress? It was a fluke, a 1,000,000-to-1 shot. She has some bizarre background in old paper," Thorne stammered, sweating under the younger man's cold glare. "But it doesn't matter. He knows. The deal is dead." Croft was silent for a moment, his mind working. A cruel, intelligent smile slowly formed on his lips. "No, the deal isn't dead. We just changed the attack. He thinks he's won. He's feeling confident, arrogant, and he's being advised by a nobody." He turned to Thorne. "You ran a background check on this Ilara Vance?" "Of course," Thorne said, pulling out his phone. "Law school dropout, mountains of medical debt for a sick father. Financially, she's on the brink of ruin." "Perfect," Croft purred. "Desperate people are malleable. We're no longer acquiring a company, Marcus. We are destroying a reputation, his and hers. I want you to dig up every piece of dirt on her, every late bill, every desperate application for a loan. We are going to walk into that boardroom tomorrow, and we are not going to talk about paper. We are going to talk about a senile old man who has jeopardized his company by taking counsel from a financially compromised, unstable, and unqualified woman. We will paint her as a grifter, a con artist who preyed on his grief. The board won't vote to save him. They'll vote to remove him just to stop the bleeding. Thorne's eyes lit up with a vicious glee. I can do that, he said. I would enjoy that immensely. Good, Croft said. By the time we're done, she won't be able to get a job clearing tables at a Greasy Spoon, let alone a steakhouse. Ilara had no idea of the storm gathering on the horizon. She and Sterling worked through the night, a strange and powerful alliance forged over cold espresso and 40-year-old documents. At dawn, a bleary-eyed but triumphant Sterling held a preliminary forensics report. The ink composition on page 24 was inconsistent with the ink from 1978, and the typewriter analysis was damning. The precious signature of the keys was completely different. They had him. When she walked into the lobby of Sterling Innovations at 9:30 a.m., she felt like an alien on a new planet. She wore a simple but clean blazer she'd bought at a consignment shop years ago. The security guard from the night before, a burly man named Frank, stopped her. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "I'm here for the board meeting, with Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Name?" "Ilara Vance." Frank's eyes widened slightly as he checked his list. "Right this way, Miss Vance. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you." As she rode the silent express elevator to the penthouse floor, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you're clever, little girl. Walk into that room and we will bury you. Go back to serving drinks where you belong." A chill snaked down her spine. They knew. They were coming for her. She stepped out into Sterling's office. He looked tired, but his blue eyes were blazing with a fire she hadn't seen before. "We have it," he said, holding up the full, notarized forensics report. "It's a smoking gun." She showed him the text message. He read it, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle jumped. "Croft, the coward. He's trying to rattle you." "It's working," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Mr. Sterling, what if they don't listen? What if they just attack me?" Sterling walked around his massive desk and did something she never expected. He placed a gentle, fatherly hand on her shoulder. "Ilara, for 40 years, I've been surrounded by men who tell me I'm right. They're lions in good times and mice in the bad. You have the courage to tell me I'm wrong, to tell me the truth. That is a courage that money cannot buy. Don't let them take that from you." He handed her a freshly printed security badge. It read, "Ilara Vance, Special Consultant to the CEO." "Your official title," he said with a grim smile. "As of this morning, you are an employee of this company. You are not some random waitress. You are my counsel. Let them come." She clipped the badge to her blazer. It felt heavier than a shield. "Okay," she said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go to war." The executive boardroom of Sterling Innovations was a place designed to humble. A vast elliptical chamber walled in glass, it hung suspended over the city, offering a god's-eye view of the world Arthur Sterling had helped build. The 15 members of the board were arranged around a table of polished granite that felt as cold and final as a tombstone. They were a gallery of grim faces, men and women who managed empires of their own, and today they looked like a jury ready to deliver a death sentence. Arthur Sterling took his seat at the head of the table. Ilara sat to his right, her chair feeling vast and empty around her small frame. She could feel the board members' eyes on her, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and disdain. She was an anomaly in their world of silk ties and Ivy League pedigrees. She was a question mark, At precisely 10 a.m., the doors swung open. Julian Croft entered, not with the swagger of a victor, but with the cold, coiled stillness of a viper. He was flanked by Marcus Thorne, who looked like a man who had gargled with acid, his face a mask of practiced outrage. "Arthur," Croft began, his voice smooth and resonant. "I'm glad we could all gather. It's a sad day when a company must be saved from its own founder." He let his gaze drift over to Ilara, and a contemptuous smirk played on his lips. "But I see you've brought your emotional support, Waitress. How quaint." A few nervous titters echoed around the table. "That's enough, Julian," Sterling said, his voice like rolling thunder. "You have no standing here. Your claim is based on fraud." "Fraud?" Marcus Thorne stepped forward, slamming a thick binder onto the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "The only fraud in this room is being perpetrated by you, Arthur. Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he announced, his voice ringing with theatrical indignation. "We are not here to discuss a forged document. We are here to discuss a compromised CEO." He pointed a dramatic, trembling finger at Ilara. "This woman is Ilara Vance, and until 48 hours ago, her most significant professional decision was whether to serve the Chardonnay or the Pinot Grigio. She is a law school dropout, saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt. She is desperate. A desperate woman who saw an opportunity to prey on a grieving, confused old man, whispering poison in his ear to secure herself a payday." He threw a stack of papers onto the table. Ilara's credit reports, loan applications, her father's medical bills. They scattered across the polished granite like dead leaves. "Arthur Sterling is rejecting a lucrative stabilizing offer for this company based on the paranoid delusions of a financially destitute charlatan," Thorne roared. "This is not leadership, it is madness. We are filing an emergency motion with this board to have Arthur removed for gross negligence and a clear breach of his fiduciary duty." The room was in chaos. Board members were shouting. One of them, a stern-faced woman named Eleanor Higgins, turned to Sterling, her face pale. "Arthur, for God's sake, is any of this true? Are you really taking legal advice from your waitress?" Sterling didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the scattered papers. He looked at Ilara, and in his eyes, she saw a silent command. Now, this was it. Her throat was dry. Her hands were slick with sweat under the table. She thought of the text message. She thought of Thorne's sneering face. She thought of her father, in his chair, unable to hold a pen, who had taught her that the truth was a physical thing. She pushed back her chair and stood. The room fell silent. Every eye was on her. "Mr. Thorne is correct," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying in the acoustically perfect room. "I am not a lawyer. I did drop out of school, and my family is in debt." She looked at each board member, meeting their skeptical gazes. "Everything he says about my circumstances is true. But that is not the subject of this meeting. The subject," she said, her voice gaining strength, "is a piece of paper." She walked to the projector and, with a steady hand, replaced the Sterling Innovations logo with a new image. It was a high-resolution, microscopic scan. "This," she said, "is a photomicrograph of the paper fibers from page 23 of the 1978 Charter. As you can see, it is composed of 75% cotton rag fiber, consistent with high-end legal documents of the era. And this," she clicked to the next slide, "is page 24, the page containing Article 17, Section B. It is 100% processed wood pulp, chemically treated to appear aged. A paper that did not exist in this form in 1978. A murmur went through the room. "And this," she continued, her voice cold and precise, "is an overlay of the letter A from page 23, typed on the original machine, and the letter A from page 24. 2 letters appeared, one red, one blue. Note the slight upward tilt of the crossbar and the faint impression on the left side of the bowl. This is the typewriter's unique fingerprint. The letter from page 24 is typographically perfect. It has no fingerprint. It is a ghost. She turned from the screen to face Julian Croft, whose face had gone from smug to stony. This isn't a legal loophole, Mr. Croft. It's a common felony. You and your father planted a forgery in the founding documents of this company, waiting for the day you could use it to steal it. You didn't count on someone actually looking at the paper. She let the silence hang for a moment, then delivered the final, killing blow. She looked at the board. The district attorney's office has already been notified. A team from the Economic Crimes Unit is on their way to Mr. Croft's office with a warrant as we speak. This isn't a takeover vote anymore. It's a crime scene. The boardroom didn't erupt. It imploded. The veneer of corporate civility vaporized. Eleanor Higgins was on her phone, her voice sharp. "Sell! Liquidate every share of Croft Equity! Now! I don't care what the price is. Get us out!" Julian Croft was frozen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The predator had become the prey. He looked at the screen, at the damning evidence, then at Ilara, this impossible, invisible woman who had undone him. Then he turned and ran. Not walked. He ran from the room, his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, stumbling after him like a kicked dog. When the door slammed shut, 12 pairs of eyes in the silent room turned to Ilara. They were no longer looking at a waitress, or a consultant, or a question mark. They were looking at the woman who had just saved them all. The quiet in Arthur Sterling's penthouse office was a universe away from the pandemonium erupting on every financial news network in the country. The 80-inch screen on his wall was a silent movie of chaos. Graphics showing the vertical collapse of Croft Equity's stock price, footage of grim-faced FBI agents carrying evidence boxes from Croft's gleaming office tower, and a chyron that burned in bright red letters. Sterling takeover fails amid massive forgery scandal. It had been 4 hours since Julian Croft had fled the boardroom. In that time, his empire had ceased to exist. Ilara sat on a plush leather couch, a cup of tea she didn't remember being given growing cold in her hands. She felt hollowed out, the adrenaline that had fueled her replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She watched the news, feeling a strange detachment, as if she were watching a story about someone else. The hands that had exposed $1 billion fraud were the same hands that, just 2 days ago, had been polishing silverware. The disconnect was dizzying. The office door opened, and Sterling walked in. The weariness of the past weeks had been sand-blasted away, leaving behind a man who looked 10 years younger, his blue eyes clear and bright. He was holding a single, thick, leather-bound document. "They arrested him at the airport," Sterling said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of savage satisfaction. "Trying to get on a private jet to the Caymans. They're calling it the most audacious corporate fraud attempt in a generation." He sat in the armchair opposite her, placing the document on the heavy oak coffee table between them. "We won, Ilara." She managed a faint smile. "We did." The clock on the wall chimed, a gentle, melodic sound. 3 p.m. A sudden, absurd panic seized her. "Oh my God," she breathed, placing the teacup down with a clatter. "I have to go." Sterling raised an eyebrow. "Go where?" "The district attorney will want a formal statement, but that can wait until tomorrow." "No, not that. Work," she said, standing and smoothing down her blazer. "My shift. I'm supposed to be setting up for the dinner service at the Sovereign. Marco is going to fire me for a no-show." The words sounded insane as they left her mouth. She had just rewritten the landscape of Chicago business, and she was worried about her job folding napkins. But that was her life. Victories like this didn't pay for her father's new medication. Sterling didn't smile. He just watched her with that same intense, unreadable expression from the night before. "Sit down, Ilara. Mr. Sterling, you don't understand. I can't afford to lose that job. The tips. You're not going back to the Sovereign," he said, his voice gentle but absolute. "I called Marco 2 hours ago." Her stomach plummeted. You called him. What did you tell him?" "I told him your consultancy work for me has become a permanent position," Sterling said calmly, "and that your resignation from his establishment was effective immediately." "You quit for me?" she whispered, sinking back onto the couch, the words knocking the air from her lungs. A wave of fear, cold and familiar, washed over her. "But I'm not a consultant. I don't know anything about manufacturing or logistics. I just know paper." "You're wrong," Sterling said, leaning forward. "You don't just know paper. You know the truth. You know how to look at something everyone else takes for granted and see the lie. For the last 10 years, I've been surrounded by people who are paid to agree with me. I've become insulated, slow. I almost lost everything because I forgot to look at the details." He pushed the leather-bound document across the table towards her. "I need someone who isn't afraid to tell me the Emperor has no clothes. I need an archivist, a historian, a professional skeptic. I need a guardian of the truth." She looked down at the cover. The gold-embossed letters read, "Vance & Son, a division of Sterling Innovations, Corporate Archives and Authentication." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at him, speechless. "Read the proposal," he urged. With trembling hands, she opened it. It wasn't an employment contract. It was a business plan. Sterling Innovations would acquire the Vance & Son name and assets. It would fund the reopening of the shop on Clark Street, not just as a restorer of antique maps, but as the new headquarters for the company's entire archival and due diligence department. It outlined a budget for state-of-the-art equipment and a small staff, to be hired and managed by her. Then she saw the last page. Compensation package for the director, Ilara Vance. The number she saw there wasn't a salary. It was a rescue. It was her father's medical debt erased. It was the best neurological care in the country. It was the end of the fear that came with the ringing of the phone or the arrival of the mail. "Mr. Sterling, I can't," she stammered, tears blurring the words on the page. "I don't have an MBA. I don't have any degree at all. The board can go to hell," Sterling said with a fierce grin. "I own 54% of this company as of this morning, thanks to you. And I don't hire resumes, Ilara. I hire people. I hire talent. And your talent is rarer and more valuable than 100 Harvard MBAs. He stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "There's one more thing. Your father. I've spoken with my personal physician at Northwestern. They are pioneering a new deep brain stimulation treatment for Parkinson's. It's experimental, but the results are promising. The Sterling Innovations medical plan will cover every penny. We'll have him assessed next week." The dam broke. The tears she had held back for 2 years, tears of fear, of exhaustion, of quiet desperation, finally fell. They were not tears of sadness, but of a relief so profound it was painful. She had been fighting a war alone for so long, and someone had just told her it was over. "Thank you," she choked out, the 2 words feeling hopelessly inadequate. Sterling turned from the window, a small, genuine smile on his face. "Don't thank me. I should be thanking you. You didn't just save my company, Elara. You reminded me of what it was built on. Truth, hard work, and an eye for detail. Welcome home to the paper business. The next Monday, the sun cast long shadows down Clark Street. A new, hand-painted sign was being installed above the door of the old shop. It read, in elegant gold leaf, Vance and Son. Below it, in smaller, modern letters, a division of Sterling Innovations. Inside, the scent of old paper and bookbinder's glue was being replaced by the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings. Elara stood behind the old oak counter, running her hand over its smooth, worn surface. Her father sat in a comfortable new wheelchair nearby, a blanket over his lap. He was weaker, but his eyes, those sharp hawk's eyes, were clearer than they had been in years. He looked around the revitalized shop, at the new climate-controlled display cases and the state-of-the-art restoration tables. You did good, Ellie girl, he whispered, his voice raspy. You always could read the paper. A young man in a courier's uniform entered, placing a cardboard box on the counter. First delivery for the new department, Miss Vance. Elara opened it. Inside was a stack of corporate charters and acquisition proposals for a new company Sterling was considering investing in. She picked up the top document, the paper cool and crisp against her fingertips. She held it up to the light, her eyes scanning for the watermark, for the soul of the page. She was no longer invisible. She was a guardian. She was the woman who read the lies between the lines, and her work was just beginning.